to our senior pastor, Prophetess Carol Gray, and the elders and the leaders and coordinators, members, families, and friends, Lord, in the house of the Lord and online. I want to say a special good morning to Pastor Dr. Vilma Jeremiah, who is in the house this morning. It's truly an honor. It's truly an honor to have you with us. Only this morning, the Lord would have dropped something in my spirit that Pastor Vilma and Bishop would have shared with a few of us back in Guyana many years ago. So you have been in my thoughts. Bless the Lord. God is Yahweh, is a covenant-keeping God. And whilst this may not have been the message for this morning, I believe it is what the Lord wanted us to hear. When I was called upon to share, this was definitely not what was in my heart and what was discussed to share. I guess I was given some ideas. Oh, you can share an X and Y. And then late last night into this morning, the Lord said, I started to talk to Christian Fellowship Ministries and the families of CFM about courage. A few weeks ago, he spoke to us about courage. And the basis for having courage, he said that he would have had some covenants. And he took us through the different persons and figures in the Bible and whom he would have made covenant with. And the Lord repeated the same message about courage the second time around, the Sunday after. Many times in the Bible, when we see something being repeated over and over, it's an indicator to us to listen and to pay attention. For this right here, what the Lord keeps repeating is very important. And like many others, I think when we say be bold and be courageous, there's some of us who might say, but I am bold and I am courageous. Is there any bold people in here this morning? You're bold. You know that you're bold. We don't have much. You know that you're bold. You know that you're courageous. Say, I. Yeah, we know that we're bold and we know that we're courageous. And I'm like many of you, but I'm going to be very honest. And I said this before and I'll say it again. When it comes to face with some people and with some situations and with some conditions, fear steps in front of that boldness, in front of that courage that we have, because some things would happen to us, if we're going to be honest, that is going to trip us up. That is going to want, is this the Sister Julie who had all that mouth? Yeah, boy, yeah, it's going to happen. And if we to go back a couple of weeks, we saw when God took us through the word, and he said, out of the loins of Noah, we saw that Abraham was birthed, and he became God's covenant partner on the earth. And though God said that he was going to make Abraham great, we see that throughout history, there has always been a battle for the seeds of Abraham. And in my myopic mind, my very small, tiny mind, I'm thinking that if God gave me a word, and I'm thinking for some of you might have a small mind like me too. If God gave you a word, then he is the one who's responsible for bringing it to pass. And I don't really have to put in much work. And I don't have to have much fear of how he's going to get it done, because he bring the word. But we see throughout the history that has not always been the case. There are always trials. There have always been issues. There's always been fights and battle, because there's a word and a promise and a seed inside all of us that the enemy is fighting and vying for. And when we don't understand how important we are carrying, the importance of what we are carrying, when we are faced with situation, I'm telling you, courage can go out the door. And if you don't believe me, you can ask Elijah. Our main text for today is taken from 2 Kings 11. But just in case, I want to give us a backdrop to how we got to 2 Kings 11. What happened? What took place to have caused 2 Kings 11 to have taken place? And this is what happened. In chapter 10, we see that Jehu kills Ahab's family. And in that chapter, verses 17 tells us that when Jehu arrived in Samaria, he killed everyone who was left of Ahab's family, just as the Lord had promised through Elijah. So before this happened, Elijah would have prophesied to Ahab that, you know what, you and everybody that concern you are going to die. And the Lord brought it to pass using Jehu. If we're to drop down in chapter 10 to verse 25, we're going to see that it says, as soon as Jehu had finished sacrificing the burnt offering, he commanded his guards and officer, go in and kill all of them. Don't let a single one escape. So they killed them all with their swords. And the guards and the officer dragged their body outside, and Jehu's men went into the innermost fortress of the temple of Baal. They dragged out the sacred pillars, using the worship of Baal, and burnt it. They smashed the sacred pillars and wrecked the temple of Baal, converting it into a public toilet, as it remains to this day. In this way, Jehu destroyed every trace of Baal worship from Israel. I want to make sure that we're seeing what is happening here. Israel was supposed to be a holy nation, a righteous people, set aside only to worship in God. Just like in the church, we're supposed to be holy and we're supposed to be righteous. A people set aside to honor God and to worship God in spirit and in truth. But in the mix, there were some idol worshiping. In the midst of these people, there were those who were walking contrary to what God has called his people to do and how they're supposed to walk. And God was cleaning house. He was bringing order into his house. And when there's order, Christmas is coming up, and many people are going to be putting their house in order. And some of the things that we see is going to be happening, it has been happening for years. When you're cleaning out your house, there's a lot of corners that you may not have visited for a while that you usually visit during that season. And you begin to throw out, and you begin to clean, and you begin to get rid of some things that should not have even been there in the first place. And there are things that are there that is no longer functioning the way it ought to have functioned. It has lost its value and its purpose and its worth, and we need to get rid of those things. That is why Christmas time we see all those garbage bins being filled, because people are cleaning up. God was cleaning up. God was cleaning up. And if you remember the story of Ahab, when God would have visited Ahab after he would have killed with his wife Naboth, the prophet came and he said, God's going to deal with you. The thing about it, Ahab repented on the spot, but then the curse went over to his generation. Many of us be going through some things, not because we would have put our hands to evil, but because of some things that our parents and our parents' parents would have gotten involved with, that the word of the Lord himself would have sent them and said, okay, I'm going to deal with you, or I deal with your family. And it was the first, second, third, and fourth generation of Ahab. And we're seeing it coming to pass. Verse 35 tells us when Jehu died, he was buried in Samaria. Then his son, Jehoahaz, became the next king. In all, Jehu reigned over Israel from Samaria for 28 years. So now that we've gotten a backdrop of what took place prior to 2 Kings 11, I want us to read and have a good understanding of what took place in 2 Kings 11. And I'm reading from the New Living Translation. When Athaliah, the mother of King Azariah of Judah, learned that her son was dead, she began to destroy the rest of the royal family. But Azariah's sister Joshebed, the daughter of King Ram, took Azariah's infant son, Joash, and took him away from among the rest of the king's children who were about to be killed. She put Joash and his nurse in the bedroom, and they hid him from Athaliah. So the child was not murdered. Joash remained hidden in the temple of the Lord for 6 years while Athaliah ruled over the land. In the 7th year of Athaliah's reign, Jehoiada, the priest, summoned the commanders, Harite mercenaries, the palace guards to come to the temple of the Lord. He made a solemn pact with them and made them swear an oath of loyalty there in the Lord's temple. Then he showed them the king's son. Jehoiada told them, "This is what you must do. A third of you who are on duty on the Sabbath are to guard the royal palace itself. Another third of you are to stand guard at the shore gate. And the final third must stand guard behind the palace guard. These 3 groups will all guard the palace. The other 2 units who are off duty on the Sabbath must stand guard for the king at the Lord's temple. Form a bodyguard around the king and keep your weapons in hand. Kill anyone who tries to break through. Stay with the king wherever he goes." So the commanders did everything that Jehoiada, the priest, ordered. The commanders took charge of them, reporting for duty that Sabbath. As well as those who were going off duty, they brought them all to Jehoiada the priest. And he supplied them with the spears and small shields that had once belonged to King David and were stored in the temple of the Lord. The palace guards stationed themselves around the king with their weapons ready. Tell your neighbor, weapons ready. Tell the next one, weapons ready. They formed a line from the south side of the temple around the north side and all around the altar. Why did they have to have weapons ready around the altar? Then Jehoiada brought out Joash, the king's son, placed the crown on his head, and presented him with a copy of God's law. They anointed him and proclaimed him king. And everyone clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king!" When Athaliah heard the noise made by the palace guards and the people, she hurried to the Lord's temple to see what was happening. When she arrived, she saw the newly crowned king standing in his place of authority by the pillar, as was the custom at that time of coronation. The commanders and the trumpeters were surrounding him, and people from all over the land were rejoicing and blowing trumpets. When Athaliah saw all this, she tore her clothes in despair and shouted, "Treason! Treason!" Then Jehoiada, the priest, ordered the commanders who were in charge of the troops, "Take her to the soldiers in front of the temple and kill anyone who tries to rescue her." For the priests had said, "She must not be killed in the temple of the Lord." So they seized her, and the priest had said, "She must not be killed in the house of the Lord, in the temple of the Lord." So they seized her and led her out to the gate where the horses enter the palace grounds, and she was killed there. Then Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people that would be the Lord's people. He also made a covenant between the king and the people. And all the people of the land went over to the temple of Baal and tore it down. They demolished the altars and smashed the idols to pieces. They killed Mathan, the priest of Baal, in front of the altars. Jehoiada, the priest, stationed guards at the temple of the Lord. Then the commanders, the Karite mercenaries, the palace guard, and all the people of the land escorted the king from the temple of the Lord. They went through the gate of the guards and into the palace, and the king took his seat on the royal throne. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was peaceful because Athaliah had been killed at the king's palace. Joash was 7 years old when he became king. What a heavy reading. What a scene. Yahweh, the covenant-keeping God. Yahweh, the covenant-keeping God. Way before Joash came on the scene, God made a covenant to Noah, then to Abraham, and it went on straight down to David's lineage. But something happened when God begins to clean the place up. When God begins to dismantle altars that were erected in his place. When God began to destroy the people and all the works that should not have been happening in his house, the enemy got angry. May I submit to you that when we take a stand as the people of God and we make a decision to get rid of the sin, to get rid of the things in our lives that stands between holiness and righteousness and God and us. There is a relationship that God wants with his people. And it has to be on his term. And it has to be in his condition. But the things that are happening in our lives that God say had to get rid of. Some of us need a Jehu in our lives who are brave, who is courageous enough to say, hey, I'm taking it out. Some of us are weak and we don't have the courage to get rid of some sins and to get rid of some people out of our life. But the God who is a covenant-keeping God is sending people in our lives this morning who's going to come alongside you and say, stop it. They're going to chase some Ahabs and his acolytes out of your life. I love how the Lord sees when we need help and he sends it. I'm not sure who is trying to usurp or destroy the seed of God that is inside of us, better yet, inside of CFM. But what I know that the Lord is saying to all of us this morning, that I am Yahweh. And I don't want you to pay attention to those who have gone. I don't want you to pay attention to those who are no longer there. Because you see, when Athaliah usurped and she'd been on her killing spree, the sad thing about it is that she didn't even spare those who were suckling. Some of us are babes in Christ and we are very innocent. We now come on the scene. We now getting to know Jesus for ourselves. She attacked even then. And there's some of us, we are seasoned Christian. We are under attack. There's some of us who we now getting into the vibe. You are under attack. And there's some of us that now come. Dad, you are under attack too. Do you know why? Because she wanted to make sure that no seed of royalty survived. That they will come up against her later on to claim any throne. And that is how the enemy works. When he sees you as a candidate of who God have a covenant with, he comes after you. If you are going through a season in your life where you feel like the enemy is just coming after you, one situation, another situation, and situation just coming. I want to tell you something. You're going through that because of what you're carrying. You are in that situation because of the covenant that is upon your life. And because Yahweh is a covenant keeping God, some miracle is about to happen. A miracle is about to happen. The Bible tells us that due to the covenant promise that God made with Abraham, we are now focused on David's descendants and his offspring. However, we find that David's promised dynasty nearly extinguished, but miraculously preserved. It was almost eradicated by Athaliah, the queen mother, who upon learning that her son Ahaziah was killed by Jehu, rose up and destroyed all the royal descendants, although she knew to be related to the throne. We look around and we can see a lot of people just getting taken off the scene. And whilst we may not see what is inside of them, we can see some behaviors. And he said, it's because they behave this way that they're being taken off the scene. And because of that behavior that they're being taken off the scene. But what we have not seen is that they are taken off the scene because of the royal blood that is in them. Sometimes we overlook some people because they look at they're not worth anything. But Athaliah knew their value. She knew their worth. The enemy know your value. And the enemy know your worth. He know the worth and the value of each and every one of your children and your grandchildren. And he will not spare them this morning. My God, I want to take what I'm telling you and take it into your heart this morning. If your family is under attack, if you are under attack, it is because of the royal blood that God has made a covenant with that you are carrying that is really under attack. Athaliah, destroyed all that was left of the seed, of the royal seed. It was strange that such a person who had been herself a king's daughter, a king's wife, and a king's mother could do something like this to her own family, into which she herself was engrafted. But she did it for two reasons. One, from a spirit of ambition. God has been talking to us about humility and about humbling ourselves. And here the Lord is lighting up the spirit of ambition. I'm afraid of ambitious people. Ambitious people will literally do everything and anything to get what they want. Ambitious people will become your friend for many years. Ambitious people will marry into your family and even bear children just to get what they want. Ambitious people will give you the best gifts and put you on a pedestal to make you feel so special, like I got your back. Ambitious people would cry with you, will mourn with you, will eat and drink with you because of their motives, and they would do literally anything to get what they want. So cool. Many of us are in relationship with some ambitious people and we don't even know it. Many of us are married to some ambitious people and we don't even know it. Ambitious from a spirit of ambition. She thirsted and hunger for authority and rulership. That was her thirst. That was her hunger. I'm telling you, we need to start become afraid of people who are going after rulership and leadership and authority and power, and look at how they want to get it. They don't care if they have to gossip. They don't care what they have to do. Even got to do because of their ambition. They don't believe that they can get it in any other way, so whichever way come to do it. She made sure, or tried to, that none might reign with her. She slew even the infants and the suckling that might have reigned after her. You see the thing about ambitious people? I don't even want nobody come after me and be better than me. Listen, when I done, make my mark here, the gap that I leave in, you have to talk about me for the next 10 generations. You have to keep boasting about me for the next 10 generations, because I'm not leaving anyone to come after me to outshine me. That is Athaliah. That none might reign with her, she slew even the suckling, not even after, for fear of competition, for fear of having a competitor. Not anyone must be reserved as a successor. For any of us, you know your heart's condition. And God is exposing us to the spirit of ambition. And he's saying, get rid of it. Get rid of it. It's a wicked spirit. Because the thing about ambitious spirits is when they see an opportunity. When they see an opportunity, they will seize it at any cost. But in the same scripture, although she was exposed to an opportunity to take that throne, do you know that the priest also had an opportunity to take that throne? Because if we to go back into the book of Deuteronomy chapter 17 and verse 12, you can see the kind of power and weight that the high priest usually carried. And it says, and the man that will not presumptuously and will not hearken unto the priest that standeth to minister there before the Lord God, or unto the judge, even that man shall die, and thou shalt put away the evil from Israel. So the priest had an opportunity, an opening, that he could have seized power. But he was not an ambitious one. God wants us to use our power and our strength and our courage to please him, not ourselves. Ambitious people have an insatiable appetite to satisfy a fleshly desire that is willing to do literally anything to get it. The second driving force behind Athaliah is from the spirit of revenge and rage against God. I personally want to say against God's people, because it's Jehu who God would have said, go do this, and he did it. But the Lord had to quicken my spirit that anybody who is attacking you is not attacking you, they're attacking me. It's me. That is why Jesus could have met Paul on the road to Damascus and asked him that question, why persecutest thou me? Now, Jesus wasn't the one who was burnt with oil and beaten and hung and strangled and speared and stabbed. And that wasn't Jesus, it was his people. So every time something is happening to God's people, it's really happening to him. So as much as religious folks might want to say, I don't have a problem with God, I would have a problem with Delano. No, you have a problem with God. Because it's God that lives in Delano. And if you have a problem with Delano, you have a problem with God. I want to encourage somebody this morning. Is there anybody that have a problem with you? Oh, nobody have. Let me come over this side. Is there anybody in your life that have a problem with you? Wow, this is a good church, boy. Nobody. Ain't no nobody. Now I have a problem with them? Wow. Lord, I thank you. This is beautiful. This is really good. Nobody got no problem with you. Wow, maybe I should ask another question. Is there anybody that you have a problem with? Maybe that's the right question then. Because I'm going to tell you something. If that's the case, then you got to check the spirit behind that person. Because woe be unto you if the person that you got a problem with is carrying the Spirit of God. You're in trouble. You're in trouble. Because God takes it personal. When you attack his own, he takes it personal. So you being under attack, I want to tell you this morning, God is taking it personal. So she was moving under the control of a spirit of revenge and rage against God. You see, the house of Ahab being utterly destroyed, and if you to read chapter 10, listen, Jehu was I would have loved to shake that man's hands. Jehu set the right tempo. If he was after you, and anybody run to your rescue, anybody who associated with you, anybody who want to come and represent you, they get it. Let me tell you something. When God is telling you to cut yourself off from a particular behavior, he really means the behavior and all the friends that supports that behavior. Because they have a way in which people come to validate your bad behavior. Where people will come and tell you, listen, you don't think it's God send that? You don't think it's God do this? I remember somebody come up at the altar to testify how God has blessed this person's child with a good man, and he has done X for the family and Y for the family. Listen, she was testifying. She was even speaking in tongues. At the end of her testimony, she said, but church, I want you guys to pray for this child because, the man is a mad man, right? You understand what I'm saying? When God is getting rid of sin, it's not a partial thing, And that's a strong message to us. If it is that God is working on you with the alcohol issue, and he's separating you from the alcohol, or the alcohol from you, it simply means this. If you are in the grocery aisle and you look up and there's alcohol on that shelf, he is saying, go to the other shelf. Tell your wife when you reach home, I couldn't buy that item because in that row had something that God had separated me from, and I need to stay far away from it. That is why, as a relationship counselor, I have a problem when somebody comes and say, oh, I'm still friends with my ex. God is trying to sort your life out with this, and you're holding on to things that he separated you from. Do you know that those are the things that are going to cost you your life? If you're getting rid of sin, get rid of all of the friends associated with it. And Jehu was a serious man. He said, listen, anybody associated to Ahab, get rid of them. And he told those who will work with him, if you don't kill them, I will kill you. Because you're encouraging something that the Lord is trying to delete, eradicate from Israel. Many of us are in problems today because we have been facilitators of bad behavior and sin. Facilitators. Athaliah had the spirit of revenge and rage against God. So after the house of Ahab was utterly destroyed, and her son, Ahijah, among the rest, because he was akin to it. She resolved, as it were, by way of reprisal, to destroy the house of David and cut off his line. In defiance of God's promise to perpetuate, she attempted to take out the tree, even if it was fruitless. For who can disannul what God has purposed? Who? I know from experience, grandmothers have been thought to be more fond of their grandchildren than they were of their own children. Grandmothers are guilty. And if you're a grandmother in the house, I'm not speaking with water in my mouth. I am being very honest. Some things that your own children couldn't get away with, grandchildren come in and doing worse. Because grandmothers especially, and some grandfathers, have this spot that they have the audacity to tell their child, don't talk to my grandson like that. Don't beat my granddaughter. And if possible, they will fight you for that grandchild. If that grandchild only said granny day. Granny not asking question. Am I talking to any grandmother up in the house today? Any guilty grandmother up in the house? Any guilty grandfather up in the house? Thank you, sister. God bless you for being honest. It is a known fact that grandmothers, they have this soft spot. But here we see a grandmother, willful murderer of her grandchildren. You see when rage step in? You see when anger step in? It is so deadly that the attributes of you loving and caring can switch like this. Like this. And in Atalaya, we saw it. She killed everyone. Well, except she had an obligation to nurse, to nurture, to give the tender care and touch to them. But she did not. But I thank God for Jesus. I thank God that He is Yahweh, the covenant keeping God. And I earlier when I said that the Lord dropped something in my spirit, and I was thinking about Pastor Vilma, and I was thinking about Bishop. They were in Guyana, and can't remember, so many sermons, so many different conversations. And they were talking about a time when they would have bought a house that belonged to an Obia woman. And they were living in that house. They were prospering. They were good. They were good. Them and their children. And I believe it's at some point when they were selling that property and they began to fix it up. I'm not sure what happened, but they began to notice on some walls when they were stripping it, they had some markings, some evil markings, and some witchcraft all in the ceiling. There were things buried and things all over. They lived there and had no idea what was planted, what was going on in that house. And for some of you, you are still standing, although you were living in an infested environment, bound to destroy you, bound to keep you bound, bound to make you run crazy, bound to destroy you. You know why it didn't work? Because God covered you. God was covering you. God is covering us because he is a covenant keeping God. Psalms chapter 27 verse 5. David said these words. For in the time of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion. In the secret place of his tabernacle shall he hide me. He shall set me up upon a rock. Let me tell you something. Those children, the child that God preserved, he couldn't cry out. He couldn't fast. He couldn't pray. But God set some protectors. CFM, according to God's promise, he has secured the spiritual seed that you are carrying. And I want to say this to you, just like how Joash had somebody to hide him, and not just hide him, but to give him a nurse. God has provided you someone to cover you, and they have provided you a nurse to take you through the paces. There is a covering upon our lives that we don't even know existing. And you're seeing the people dropping left and dropping right, but you are still standing because of the covenant keeping God Yahweh. He has a covering over your life. There is a protection over your life. They may have gotten your child. They may have gotten a family member. But I want to say something. You are the one who is still carrying that seed, and God is able to protect you. God is a covenant keeping God. And God has kept CFM hidden, unseen, and unhurt. Hidden, unseen, and unhurt. 7 years. 7 years. Joash was under the priest's protection. Joash was in the house of the Lord, growing up, being covered. Armed guards, armed security. He had the protection that God provided. Because God made a covenant with Abraham. And I'm sure Abraham never met Joash. And Abraham was even thinking about Joash. But what Abraham knew is that there was a covenant between God and him. And if God promised that he was going to make Abraham great, and he's going to let nations come out of him, then the likes like Atalia could have done whatever she wants. But once God has made a promise and he has made a covenant, he is more than able to see it come to pass. Let them try what they want to try. Come on, tell the enemy he can try whatever he wants. You could take me out, but I got 2 children to deal with. They got 2 to come into contend with. And if you want to take them out, they have some children that they're going to contend with. And if you want to take, they got more children coming to contend with. There is some promises that God is reminding us this morning to take courage. Because he's perfecting CFM today. God is bringing us into a good place. Tell your neighbor, God is bringing us into a good place. God is bringing us into a good place. Because in a good place, you need to take a particular posture. In a good place, you need to have the right posture. You need to have the right posture. I want us to go back to verse 9 of 11. It says, go back up to verse 4. Verse 4. It said, in the 7th year of Athaliah, At Leah's reign, Jehoiada the priest summons the commanders, the Karite mercenaries, and the palace guards to come to the palace. Come to the temple of the Lord. I want you to hear this morning. The Lord put the priest in a position that he called on mercenaries. Sometimes we hear mercenaries, and we might not want to associate ourselves with mercenaries because we know what they're capable of. But God has a place that there are some spiritual mercenaries that God has called upon to put them in place along with the palace guards. To put them in place. God is putting some order in place. Because what he's about to do, he's about to produce and to present Joash. He's about to present CFM. He's about to present you to the world. But before the presentation, he is making sure you got full coverage. And the covering that you need is not no gentle Jesus, meek and mild. Listen, the covering that CFM needs, Pastor Gray, in this season of our life is some spiritual mercenaries that God is sending our way. That when they begin to pray, it's sharp shooting, targeted shooting. So the enemy that thought that they were hiding and they couldn't be found, because I am telling you, Atalaya thought she had it covered. She was ready for 6 years. 6 years she was having her way. So she felt that she had it covered. And there's some people and there's some things that feel to themselves, I got CFM where I want them. But what they didn't see is that there was a priest who was so obedient to God, who was resolute, that listen, God is a covenant keeping God, and God made a covenant with David, and I am going to make sure that that covenant come to pass, and there's a covenant on your life, and a covenant yours, and yours, and yours, and yours, and there is a priest who has been steadfastly calling upon the armies of heaven with your name on it, and we have a mediator and an intercessor who have been warring in the spirit realm, and they say, I'm about to present you to the world. That's why you had to wait. We hear about wait? That's why we had to wait. He wasn't ready to be presented yet, because the mercenaries didn't come yet. The palace guards wasn't in place yet at the temple. The positioning didn't happen as yet. But God is coming this morning, and he is saying, I remind you to be courageous. I'm reminding you to have courage, because I have set up some things in place that is giving you full coverage to that those who would have did what they had to do and say what they had to do and reign how they wanted to reign, I'm about to deal with them. So the priest spoke to them. And verse 9 says this. So the commanders did everything that Jehoiada the priest ordered. There is an authority that has been released in this place. Now when you begin to speak, Jesus, let's tap into it. When you begin to speak, everything falls into place. Carry out the order. Let us be very careful while we're speaking in this season and in this place, because it's going to be carried out. It's going to be carried out because that is the anointing that has been here. That is here right now. And verse 12, the Bible tells us that Jehoiada brought out Joash, the king's son, placed the crown on his head, and everyone clapped their hands and shouted, "Long live the king." There is a season that is here that the Lord is placing a crown upon our heads. And this time it's not one that people will frown upon, but they will be happy to see that crown on your head. Anytime before, you deserve that crown. You're ready for that crown. There is a season when our crowning shall happen, and we'll know it's the right season. Because the people appreciated what they saw. They accepted what they saw. And for those who would have helped Atalaya, for those who would have been with her, for those who would have aided and abetted. You know what I loved when I was reading this chapter? She began to shout treason. She was the one, she didn't celebrate, you know. She began to shout, the person who committed treason began to shout treason. Have you ever found that the person who committed the offense make it sound like everybody else is the offender? Am I making sense this morning? It's got, you see what's going to happen? She who committed treason was saying everybody else committed treason. And the Bible tells us that she hurried, in verse 13, I'm still in verse 13. She hurried to the Lord's temple to see what was happening. When she arrived, she saw the newly crowned king standing in his place of authority. Jesus. To the husbands in the house, there is a place of authority that you need to take up. To the leaders in business, there is a place of authority that you need to take up. To the mothers in the lives of their children, there's a place of authority that you need to take up. For the leaders, especially Pastor Gray, there's a place of authority. It's until you are in that place. I believe Joash may have walked past that place many times as a child, but she never noticed him until he was in the place. In authority. Sometimes we are not being recognized because you are not in the place of authority. You have not been able to wield your power and your strength because you're not in the place of authority. And God is calling us as a church to our place of authority. And it says, as was the custom at times of coronation, the commanders and the trumpeters were surrounding him. And people from all over the land were rejoicing and blowing trumps. When Atalaya saw all this, she tore her clothes in despair and shouted, treason, treason. Then Jehoiada the priest ordered the commanders who are in charge of the troops, take her to the soldiers in front of the temple. And hear this part. Read with me. And the enemy that you see today, you will see them no more. Because there is no rescue for them. There is no rescue for your enemy anymore. There is no aid for your enemies anymore. There is a shift in our season. And hence the reason God is calling us to take courage. Because sometimes, because of the fear that we've been living in for so long, I'm going to be honest, there's some of us, when we're having a good season and things are going well, in that season we begin to feel sad because we're now expecting something bad is to happen. Now, boy, I've been laughing for too long. I've been happy for too long. I've been having money for too long. Life has been good for too long. Now something happened. And we go into that mode where we're waiting for the hit. And we're waiting for something bad to happen. And we're waiting. And because we expected that somebody's going to come to our enemy's aid and give them strength again to come and fight us. But God is saying, quit that. Because anybody who comes to their aid, they too are going to be destroyed. This is a season that you can permanently enjoy your salvation without fear. And the Bible tells us that the land had peace. When was the last time you enjoyed peace? When was the last time you had some happiness? That you're waking up with a smile on your face and you're going to bed with a smile on your face. Is there anybody who want to experience that? You're going to bed with a smile, plus you're waking up with a smile. Listen, God has rearranged and changed some things. And he's saying to us, I am Yahweh, the covenant keeping God. And I'm not sure who in this house needed to be reminded that there's a covenant between you and God. But if you're one of that person, say, Lord, I want you to remember me this morning. Because I feel sometimes, God, Jesus, that things are not working out. I go to bed unhappy. All of my dreams are unhappy. I wake up unhappy. God's talking to us this morning. I don't know who needs prayers. You've been having some experience that is so unexplainable, so painful, that sometimes you can't even put it into words. But the word of the Lord to us this morning is that he is Yahweh, the covenant keeping God.